Let's speak to James Marlow, who is in Tel Aviv, to get a picture of what's going on there. Israeli forces, James, saying that they've divided the Gaza Strip now into two separate entities, and they've surrounded Gaza City as well. Are we anticipating that they are now going to push on into that city?
Yes, absolutely. They're just putting the finishing touches to actually encircling that. And then, of course, you have there some specific infrastructure, the Hamas command centers, and you also have the largest hospital in Gaza itself, which is the Shifa hospital. That is where the main Hamas headquarters is believed to be buried underneath, in the tunnels underneath. So it's a very complicated issue for the Israelis to deal with. They're going to be dealing with it very delicately, but it's complicated. Now, I can tell you that I've heard from a minister and from most of the official Israeli spokespeople is that about 2 weeks ago, 90% of the civilians from the north and from Gaza City itself have moved to the south. So those left are those who are choosing to stay on, who have been prevented from leaving by Hamas and the other Islamic groups, and those who support Hamas and wish to stay and remain within the area.
Is there a fear that this could get a lot more bloody then, if there are, people still in that area and the Israeli troops are going to go in?
Well, Israel has made it very clear that it believes very much in a humanitarian corridor, and it specifically opened that. Since it's opened it a couple of times, its forces have been shot up by Hamas operatives. It's also what was reported earlier by one of the Israeli news networks, and it's actually shown video of which is received, and I personally retweeted it earlier today, of those people from the north, civilians, Palestinian civilians, making their way down the road towards the south. Sadly, they're described as civilians, and they're shot dead along the street. Now, this is unconfirmed at this point, but however, it's believed that Hamas operatives, through a vehicle, went down to shoot them because they're trying to prevent those from fleeing from the Gaza City area. If I can also just update you, a short while ago, now that the red siren alerts in the north have actually stopped, but just 5 minutes ago, and again 15, 20 minutes ago, there were a number of rockets being fired again from Lebanon. About 2 hours ago, more than 30 rockets were fired from Lebanon. I thought that they were being fired once again by Hezbollah. They've been doing most of the firing into northern Israel. And in fact, yesterday they killed another Israeli civilian who was killed in their car. But Hamas in the north, that is Hamas in southern Lebanon, are now claiming responsibility for that rocket fire. So it could be a combination of Hamas and Hezbollah. Elsewhere in Jerusalem, again, there was another stabbing this morning in the old city of Jerusalem. The female police officer has sadly died from her injuries. She becomes the 59th police officer to have been killed since October the 7th. So things are definitely heating up. But I have to tell you that the American Secretary of State has worked really, really hard, in my view, so many shuttle missions across the Middle East, across the region, to try and prevent this from expanding even further. And what he's really done is he's managed to convince the leadership of Egypt and Jordan and the Gulf states of doing what they can to stop the movement of Shia, specifically Shia groups, some of them Sunni, but Shia groups from Iraq, from Libya, from Syria, moving into southern Lebanon under the auspices of the Iranian leadership to make a full front attack to Israel from the Lebanon side.
As I was saying, we have heard from Antonio Guterres at the UN in the past few minutes, big concerns about what's going on in Gaza, Gaza becoming a graveyard for children, he said. He made quite a call saying that this needs to stop. We just need to stop all of this right now and actually do it right now. It doesn't sound like his call is going to be received by the Israelis, or I imagine probably by Hamas either.
I caught part of his statement, and I think it's a fair statement right across the board. But of course, what he doesn't seem to realize is, well, I'm sure he does. That's unfair. He does realize it, but he has to make a diplomatic statement. And that is that, of course, Israel is demanding, not just requesting, demanding the release of the 242 hostages being held somewhere in Gaza. They're probably split up. They're not all together. And unfortunately, when Israel has made that request to the Red Cross and to the United Nations, please help us, please at least see if you can get an envoy in towards them through Qatar, because Qatar, that's where the leadership of Hamas is based. And then you can actually speak to the head of Hamas inside of Gaza, which is Yahya Sinwar, who I can assure you the Israeli will target him. There's definitely a price on his head. It's not clear where he is. But to try and get that contact, and the Red Cross and the United Nations are saying right now, we just don't know where they are. We have no contact with them, and we just don't know what the situation is. And although in Israel itself, there is still a huge amount of anger of what happened on October the 7th and Hamas invading and killing 1,450 people. And then since that time, of course, Israel's losing soldiers in the Gaza Strip. Israel and the country itself has pretty much come together in demanding that although, yes, there is the possibility of a humanitarian corridor being opened, absolutely no ceasefire. And I can even go a little bit further and say that Israelis are not thrilled about the fact that 100 trucks are coming in via the Rafah crossing from Egypt into Gaza when they've got their hostages somewhere. They don't even know if they're alive. They don't know if they're eating. And they're not thrilled about the fact that the Palestinians in the south, albeit civilians, and they have the sympathy for those civilians not supporting Hamas, but they are getting that aid, and yet nobody knows what's happened to the Israeli hostages.
James Marlow in Tel Aviv, thank you very much for joining us here on LBC News. Antonio Guterres did call for hostages to be released right now as part of his statement as well, in what he said in New York. The latest, of course, from the Middle East